Hello AP English Language and Composition students. Welcome to Lesson 41. This is a review of argument analysis. Gathering the techniques after you find the meaning and the tone, gathering the techniques, and then deciding which ones you will use to explain the author's strategy, okay, to achieve his purpose of the message he's creating or she's creating and the tone. So, argument analysis. What do we do first? Well, we read the piece a few times, and I have 2 copies of this document with different annotations on it, just to show you you won't be able to write this many in a very short time sitting, but you need to think of it this way. So I read through. When I read through this passage, this little speech, I find out that right here, some people might think that this is the main idea, but it's a little bit of a trick, all right? It seems to me that education has a twofold function, utility and culture. That does seem like a main idea, but these words are so vague, the diction is unclear. As I said in the other video earlier in the year, maybe innocuous, I-N-N-O-C-U-O-U-S. It just means it's not going to offend anyone. So King's strategy is to keep a rapport with the audience, right? So I don't realize that the first time I read it, but when I read it again, I see, oh yeah, this is really a vague way of stating at its purpose, but it becomes clear later. So, what can we call that technique? Well, yes, you can call it innocuous diction like I said before, but it's really an appeal to ethos so that they will not be offended, the audience. And so it's an appeal to ethos through inoffensive diction. All right? So that's one technique that is pretty important at the beginning. Right? Yes, you can find techniques everywhere. This first paragraph, you probably find 30 techniques. But are they all that meaningful? No. So, yes, we do have an antithesis here. It gives options of what people think about education. Some of the men on campus in this, I think, all-male college, Morehouse College. But that's not that important. So we need to move on to the main ideas. All right, so let's keep looking. So this has an inductive format overall. The main idea is stated, but we don't understand it, so the clarity is here later on. So we want to say it's inductive. And why? To avoid offense. So by the time he gets to the end of the passage, or the speech, King will have not lost his audience before he makes a more potentially offensive point. All right, so what else do we have here? Well, you'll see on my next version of this that there's a lot of balancing all the way through, right? So I'll have to look at that in the next one. But right here, we have this sentence: a great majority of the so-called educated people do not think logically and scientifically. Well, what is the name for that technique? Something that's illogical, but seems illogical, but isn't. It's a paradox. So that's very puzzling. It's quizzical, it's puzzling. And why would it be there? It's not enough just to find it. This would prompt the audience to reconsider their views. Oh, maybe educated people are imperfect, right? So you've got to think behind the scenes, all right? Between the lines. What is the purpose of this? A paradox causes one to stop and consider because it doesn't make sense seemingly. So the purpose is to have the audience reconsider their viewpoint on so-called educated people. so they can formulate a new view, the one that King wants them to have. All right. Right here, we do have something. What techniques are you going to choose to write about? Well, the ones that stand out a lot, of course, the ones that are most important meaningfully too, but when we have the true from the false, the real from the unreal, facts from fiction, we have, if you wanted to be simplistic about it, 3 pairs of opposites. You could call them antonyms, antitheses, whatever you call them. Hopefully you call them the right thing, but why are they there? Well, they're contrasts. They show opposite ideas, and one side is sort of immoral and the one is more moral, all right? What words is he not using? He's really avoiding saying evil and good, good and evil, untrue and true, just and unjust, moral and immoral. He's avoiding that, just like he avoided the really wanted to say up there. So no one's going to say that because he avoids the morality aspect here more strongly. People would more agree with, well, of course I want to go with what's true as apart from not what's false. But would they agree if he explained what immorality really meant and morality really meant? Then they're more emotionally charged, so they're probably not as readily going to agree. So he's using antonyms, he's using antitheses to set his audience up to accept his point still, all right? And he's getting a little clearer, right? So yeah, that's what's going on there. And we have the paradox. We have other balancing things here too, but I'm going to move on. Well, here, look at what he said, utility and culture earlier. Now he says the purpose of education or function is to do this. You know, more logic-based, but also moral, okay? Critically, you're evaluating the morality, but he's not saying that, all right? But finally he does here, okay? So he's making his point more clear here, and now he has the people with him, so they probably wouldn't find offense. And then he moves on. He has an example. That's an argument technique, right? Mr. Talmage. And a rhetorical question. But you can't just say he uses a rhetorical question. Why? He wants to prompt a reevaluation of the perspective of what people consider to be true education, all right? Education with morals. So that's why the rhetorical question is there. And this guy was very smart, but he was racist. He doesn't say racist, but he says that this guy thought he was inferior, that King was inferior. So he avoids racism. That's a technique. The diction is pretty inoffensive, right? So now we don't have utility and culture. We have intelligence and character. So we have more clarity, right? And here we have more balance, okay? We have education will transmit not only this, but this, right? So lots of balancing, lots of items that are paired together. That's an appeal to ethos, because he seems reasonable, and he has options. He has paired things. It's very symmetrical. So he's much more instilling confidence in himself. All right, so it finally does get a little more appeal to pathos here, right? You know, emphasizing that this is a crucial issue and topic. Okay, I'm going to check my time. Oh, got a lot of time. Okay, so this is King's true thesis, but it comes later, right? So as I already told you before, that's inductive. Now, so when you're explaining all this in an essay, he's using a lot of parallelism in his style. That's more insistent. Repetition creates intensity, right? So that's another technique. When he has items paired, I already told you, a lot of balance. We trust someone who is more balanced or more reasonable, right? Here he uses very open-ended statement to show that, to project that he is not narrow in his thinking. He's open-minded, and we can trust someone who isn't trying to push something on us. So, what do you name that technique? You just explain what's going on there, all right? And you've got to recognize that it's going on. We have a metaphor here, all right? When we're linking two unlike things, creating an image, propaganda, someone's trying to brainwash us. It's a swamp, it's a dangerous, swampy area. It's a confusing, difficult trap even, all right? So he uses a metaphor. You could write about that. He is very careful even in his alliteration. He's got a lot of almost poetic techniques there. All right, so that's what you'd gather these techniques up, and then you want to group them. All right? So maybe you would think, well, what do I have here? I have schemes, like parallelism, antitheses. I have changing diction from unclear to more clear. I have, you can write about tone, but you have to write about how it's achieved. He has more moderate tone, except for at the very, very end. All right, so I want to group my techniques together, and I want my topic sentences for each section to be a purpose, a main point that a group of strategies work together to create. So I'm going to write a paragraph about subtlety, a paragraph about balance, and a paragraph about moderate tone. Look, they all are similar ideas, right? So this balance would be more schemes that create that, right? And subtlety is what he doesn't do and what he does do with his diction. Rhetorical questions. So see, I group techniques together under a purpose of those. So it could be like that all your techniques that are similar, all your schemes, you group them, but it's probably not. It's like, which of the techniques create subtlety that aren't so schematic, like that aren't based in structure, right? And then which are my more structural techniques that create balance, and then what creates a moderate tone? I'll have to look at that. Open-ended questions, open-ended statements, questions, and I'm kind of repeating myself if I use innocuous diction, but I could refer to it in a different way. So this is what you do to write an argument analysis. Find all the techniques, appeals to ethos, logos. That could be a section, right? How he moves from, how he builds ethos. That's just a whole section. How he builds logos, and how he refrains from pathos. You could write all about that, just all the three appeals, but you would miss other things. So he does use a lot of refutation too. This is what education is not and what it should be, so you could write about that. So hopefully that's a helpful review of how the techniques apply to this passage and then what you do with them, right? Okay, that should do it.